"They're making me the partner," Amelia said, lifting her glass of Cabernet as if she'd just been anointed. The entire table erupted in celebration. Silverware clinked against crystal glasses. One of the junior analysts, a kid named Mark who always looked like he was on his way to a college party, actually stood up to offer a toast. To Amelia, he stammered, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and excitement. "The architect of our most successful quarter yet." There was scattered laughter and a few polite claps. Even the managing director leaned in close to her and said, "You've got a killer instinct, Amelia." "This is only the beginning." I sat directly across from her, chewing on a piece of ribeye that had suddenly turned to ash in my mouth. I remained silent. I just nodded, playing the role of the supportive, background noise husband I was apparently meant to be. My hands were folded neatly on the white linen napkin in my lap, but a slow, burning heat was creeping up my neck. The pitch deck she had presented, her so-called killer strategy, was mine. It wasn't just inspired by my work. It wasn't a product of our brainstorming sessions. It was mine. Every line, every projection, every single word. I knew this because I had written it. I had lived it. It was the culmination of 3 years of painstaking, meticulous research, of weekends sacrificed, of quiet modeling sessions late into the night in my home office while she claimed she was too exhausted to even talk. That financial model, the very one that had saved the firm from disaster when our largest client's market imploded, was my legacy. And she had just served it up on a silver platter like an appetizer at a restaurant she couldn't have afforded if I wasn't covering half of our mortgage. I glanced down at her perfectly manicured hand as she adjusted her wine glass. A new diamond-studded watch on her wrist caught the light. A congratulatory gift from the board, no doubt. It was funny, really. The last time she'd mentioned wanting that watch, she had called it a silly dream, her words, not mine. But now, thanks to her brilliant turnaround plan, it was sparkling on her wrist while I sat invisible just a few feet away. She leaned closer, her voice a conspiratorial whisper only I could hear. "Guess it pays to have access," she said with a wink. Her tone was sickeningly sweet, but it was coated around a sharp, pointed barb. The steakhouse's ambient lights gleamed off the polished marble table. People around us were laughing, discussing the next phase of expansion, and joking about office politics as if they hadn't just witnessed a corporate mugging in broad daylight. And she basked in it all, tilting her head like a pageant queen, all polished teeth and effortless charm. I felt my mouth twitch, not into a smile, but more like the static crackle from a blown speaker. I didn't respond. I simply raised my own glass, looked her dead in the eye, and took a long drink. She interpreted that as a sign of my surrender. That was her first mistake. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't need to be loud. You don't have to scream or flip a table or storm out of the room. That's for amateurs, for people who still believe they can reclaim something through sheer volume. Real betrayal, the kind that hollows you out and replaces your blood with powdered glass, happens quietly. It happens in moments just like this one, sipping a $14 glass of wine while your wife announces to the very people you helped build that she's officially stepping onto the pedestal she just kicked you off of. When the waiter brought the check, she slid it toward me without so much as a glance. "You got this, right?" she said, her smile all teeth. Partners don't pay for their own celebration dinner. That was her second mistake. She didn't notice the complete lack of reaction in my eyes as I pulled out my credit card. She didn't see that my hand was perfectly steady as I signed the receipt, as if I were paying for a funeral. Because in a way, I was. It just wasn't mine. When we arrived home, she walked in ahead of me, the clicks of her heels on the hardwood floors echoing like victory drums. "I might need your help putting a few things together for the retreat next week," she said over her shoulder, already halfway to the kitchen. "They're letting me lead the entire growth initiative for the new client portfolio." I didn't answer. She continued, shrugging off her jacket and kicking off her shoes. "I mean, we always said we were a team, right? You could tighten up some of the numbers before the board sees the next phase. Nobody understands that algorithm like you do." "No," No, they certainly don't. I walked into my office, closed the door behind me, and locked it. In the bottom drawer of my desk, there was a folder I hadn't touched in years. It was a heavy manila folder, labeled in bold, permanent black ink, IP Defense Originals. Inside was the entire strategic framework, stamped, notarized, and dated. It contained backups in triplicate, every version control snapshot, and every encrypted draft saved to an offline drive. All of it was filed long before we ever merged our household computer systems. She had pulled the files from the shared drive, our working drafts. She had absolutely no idea that the originals, the real proof, lived somewhere else entirely. That was her third mistake. I stared at the envelope for a long, quiet moment. Then, I opened my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found a single entry labeled Ironwood. No first name, no last name, no explanation, just a word. The kind of word you save for the moment you're ready to burn the entire house down and walk away from the ashes with your shoes still clean. I typed two simple words. I'm ready. I heard her laughing before I even opened the front door. It wasn't the fake, polite laugh she used at networking events or the clipped chuckle she reserved for when I said something she deemed beneath her. No, this was her genuine, unfiltered, I just conquered the world laugh, loose, loud, and giddy, as if she had finally shed the last weight holding her down. Me. Can you believe it? She said, her voice echoing from the kitchen where she was on a video call with one of her insufferable Pilates friends, the one who still mockingly called me by my last name after 5 years. They ate it up, Chloe. Even the chairman. I swear I could have sold them a PowerPoint presentation on potato farming, and they would have thrown equity at me. She laughed again. No, listen. I was nervous at first, but once I got to slide 6, the one with the client attrition curve, the entire mood in the room shifted. That's when I knew I had nailed it. I owned it. Slide 6. My slide 6. I could recite that entire analysis in my sleep. Hell, I had done so for years. Every single line of logic, every potential flaw I had anticipated, every recommendation drawn from brutal trial and error during late nights and forgotten weekends. And now, she owned it. I moved past the hallway like a ghost. She didn't even hear the front door close behind me. My office smelled of old paper and eucalyptus oil from a diffuser she had once insisted my space needed for a more feminine balance. The diffuser had been dead for months now, just like our marriage. She probably hadn't even noticed it had run out of oil. I sat down at the desk I hadn't truly worked at in years, not since she received the promotion that elevated her from a coworker to a decision-maker. That was when I began to fade into the background, becoming the husband who picked up the dry cleaning and quietly revised the quarterly forecasts because, as she would say, you're just so good with the detail stuff, babe. The bottom right drawer creaked like a reluctant witness as I opened it. I reached past dusty files, old trade magazines, and expired key cards, and pulled out the envelope I hadn't touched since the day she first hinted at pursuing a management role. It was heavier than I remembered. It was a manila envelope sealed with packing tape, with the words IP Defense Originals printed in my own block letters. I broke the seal. Inside were notarized timestamps from the initial draft dates, ink-stamped and backed by a witness's signature. There were version logs exported directly from my offline drafting software, each snapshot frozen in time, showing how the model evolved under my guidance. There were diagrams I had drawn by hand and scanned before the firm even had a name for the initiative. There were notes in the margins, questions I had asked myself, late-night mathematical scribbles, and authenticated server logs that proved which files were created where, and most crucially, when. This wasn't just evidence. This was a kill shot. She thought she had stolen a crown. What she had actually taken was a grenade, and I was holding the pin. I slid a flash drive out from a false bottom in the envelope. It was encrypted, password protected, and hidden beneath decoy family photos and old invoices. It was the only place where every unedited original file existed. She had never seen this, and never could have, because I hadn't saved it for her. I had saved it for myself, back when I still believed in the firm, back when I thought, if they ever turn on me, at least I'll have this. It turned out it wasn't the firm I needed protection from. I looked at the drive, then back at my phone. Ironwood, that's all the contact said. No name, no company, no logo, just one word and a number. He had given it to me on the day he left. Robert Mercer, the man who had founded the firm from a shoebox office with nothing more than a fold-out chair and a packet of stolen crackers. He had built it from the ground up, sold it to a holding trust, and then vanished into the mountains like some kind of capitalist monk. No one had heard from him in 5 years. Some people didn't even think he was still alive, but I knew better. He had once told me, during a quiet conversation after the founders' dinner, when they forget who built the walls, remind them where the bricks came from. And then he had handed me that number. You'll know when, he'd said. I didn't know if he would answer, but I knew I couldn't go back to bed until I tried. I tapped the screen, hesitated for a moment, and then typed, "I need to use it." I stared at the message for a full minute before I hit send. The read receipt appeared instantly, and then, nothing. I sat in the darkness, lit only by the dull glow of my monitor and the faded corners of my old diagrams. In the other room, she was still laughing. She had no idea what she had just set in motion. She thought I had stayed silent because I was scared. She didn't realize that silence is what I use to load the gun. The call came at 2:41 a.m. Not a text, not a voicemail, but a real, ringing phone call, the kind that slices through the silence of the night like a scalpel. I hadn't gone to bed. I was still in my office, sitting in the same chair where I used to outline ideas that no one ever gave me credit for. The flash drive sat on the desk in front of me like a detonator. I hadn't touched it in over an hour. When the screen lit up with an unknown number, I didn't hesitate. I answered before the second ring. There was a moment of silence on the other end, then a low exhale. Finally, a voice, raspy and unmistakable. "Still up, huh, Robert Mercer." I hadn't heard that voice since the week he walked out of the firm. There had been no farewell speech, no press release, just a one-line email, "Sold my stake. Heading north." He had vanished so completely that conspiracy theories had sprung up around his disappearance. Some said he was living on a sailboat near Belize. Others whispered about cancer treatments in Switzerland. But I knew where he went. He had told me years ago, over a bottle of rye in a quiet hotel bar, "The mountains don't lie. They just wait." "Robert," I said, nothing more, just his name. He didn't answer right away. Then, finally, he said, "Tell me why you used the word Ironwood." Another pause. "You know what it means." "I do. And you're not just angry." "No." He exhaled again. I could almost hear the crackle of a wood stove in the background. "When they forget who built the walls," he murmured, "remind them where the bricks came from." He fell silent again, but I could feel it. He remembered, not just the saying, but the exact moment it was said. It was during the pilot phase of the firm's first major turnaround. I had stayed late to fix a broken model that someone else had botched. He had shown up unexpectedly, saw my scribbled corrections, and told me I had builder's blood. Now, that same blueprint had been stolen. "I take it she doesn't know about the offline drive?" he finally asked. "Not a clue. And you still have all of it? The paper trail, the logs, the notarizations, every single brick," I said. Then, without any preamble, he stated, "I'll be there by 7:45. I blinked. "Robert, you don't have to do that." I said I would. The line went dead. I just stared at the phone. The screen went dark again, as if the call had never happened. No missed call notification, no voicemail, just the heavy silence of someone very old and very dangerous choosing to re-enter the world, for me. 7:45. He didn't ask for the address. He already knew it. I stood up and pulled the blackout curtain open slightly. Outside, the street was dead quiet. Our cul-de-sac slept peacefully, as it always did. Peaceful, boring, smug. If you didn't know any better, you'd think the world was fine, that marriages were solid, that companies were fair, and that talent always won. But Robert knew better, and so did I. At 6:20 a.m., I showered, shaved, and dressed as if I were going to a funeral. In a way, I was. At 7:30 a.m., I heard a low hum from the street. No headlights, just the idling purr of a well-maintained engine. I stepped outside. There it was, a black, beat-up Defender, caked in dust, with no license plates. The kind of vehicle that says, "I don't need to be found." He stepped out, wearing an old wool coat, cracked leather gloves, and the same intense expression he wore when he once chewed out a billionaire for not knowing his own profit margin. His beard was thicker and wider, but his eyes were still surgical. He didn't shake my hand. He just looked at me and said, "Show me." Inside, we didn't waste time with coffee. I opened the folder and spread the documents across the dining room table like war maps. He read each one silently, his finger gliding over timestamps and access logs. "Breach of confidentiality," he said under his breath. "Breach of NDA, too." She didn't have clearance for these servers. She pulled it from the shared work folder, I explained. "Not the originals, not the locked systems, and the originals." I handed him the flash drive. He held it for a long moment, then dropped it into the inside pocket of his coat. "This," he said, "was never meant to be hers." I didn't need to nod. He picked up the envelope and slid everything back inside, slowly and deliberately. Then, he pulled out a thick, leather-bound folio from his coat. It was old and unmarked. "This is mine," he said. "Their paperwork, board signatures, retention rights. You'd be amazed how much say I still have when I wave the original operating charter in their faces." I stared at it. I had only ever seen redacted, sanitized copies of that document. What he held was the real thing, the foundation, the bricks. "I'll handle it," he said. "Do you need me to come with you?" He raised one eyebrow. "No, let them wonder where you are." He buttoned his coat, and as he turned toward the door, he said, "There's a difference between being erased and choosing silence. Make sure she understands that." Then he left. No goodbye, just the quiet click of the front door. At 7:45 a.m., Robert Mercer re-entered the building he had once ruled, like a silent ghost returning to his haunt. And I sat in my kitchen, drinking her favorite espresso, waiting for the echo. He didn't say good morning. He didn't comment on the sunrise or the fog still hanging low over the neighborhood like a secret not yet spoken aloud. He had simply walked in, his coat still damp from the mountain air, and taken the folder from my hands with the kind of silence that indicated everything was already in motion. Robert Mercer was not a man who wasted his breath. That was what made him so terrifying back in the early days. He didn't fill a room with words. He let other people trip over their own justifications while he stared at the numbers, the contracts, the bleeding edge of someone's lie. And now, 30 years after he had started the company with nothing but a leveraged lease and a solid reputation, he stood in my dining room under the yellow kitchen lights, thumbing through my documentation as if it were scripture. He didn't sit, just stood there reading, flipping one page at a time. The notary seals, the version history charts, the restricted server logs showing unauthorized access at 1:14 a.m. all tied to her credentials, with the IP addresses traced back to our home router. Her name was stamped onto the document metadata like a child signing someone else's homework. "She used her own login," he observed. "No," I corrected him. "She copied it from the shared archive, the public draft folder. I kept the originals offline." He nodded once. No praise, no surprised reaction, just confirmation that I had done what I said I would. Then he got to the internal audit trail, the one she didn't know existed. It showed when the files were moved, who accessed them, and what edits were made. The audit timestamp was rock solid. Mercer stared at it longer than the rest, his thumb resting over the printout as if he could feel the betrayal in the ink. "She presented this last Thursday?" he asked. "Yep." called it her vision for sustainable scaling. Mercer muttered something under his breath. It wasn't a curse, just a low growl of contempt, a kind of internal recoil. His eyes narrowed, and he exhaled sharply through his nose. "This isn't just theft," he said finally, his voice low and level. "It's a breach and a violation of her NDA. She had no clearance to touch this." "I know, and they gave her a partnership slot for it. A unanimous vote. They even fast-tracked it." His lip curled slightly. "Idiots." He flipped the last page and closed the folder as if sealing a coffin. "You included the white paper draft?" he asked. "Annexed at the back," I confirmed. "The comparative market study in Appendix C. The adaptive response model, watermarked and signed." He didn't nod, just slipped the folder into a thick leather briefcase, the kind that hadn't been in style since the early 90s but looked like it had outlasted every trend. He buckled it shut with 2 loud snaps, then took out a pen and wrote something on a post-it note, which he stuck to the front flap of the briefcase. "You don't want to come to this," he said, already heading for the door. "I should be there." "No," he snapped. Then, more gently, "let them squirm without you. You being there makes it personal. They'll try to frame it as a couple's spat, a domestic misunderstanding wrapped in office drama. But without you, it's legal. It's structural. It's an exposure risk. And they'll have to look at each other when I read them the clause she broke." I followed him to the doorway. "You're really going in person?" I asked. He smiled for the first time, a slow, tight-lipped smirk that reminded me why no one ever dared to bet against him. "Oh, I'm going," he said. "I haven't seen those boardroom worms in 5 years. They think I've gone soft, that I'm living in a cabin somewhere, chopping wood and writing my memoirs. Aren't you?" He turned halfway back, his eyes sharp. "Sure, and now I'm bringing an axe to the office." He pulled the door open, paused, and looked back at me. "When they see this folder," he said, "they won't just fire her. They'll ask how she even got this far. And that's where the fun begins." He left without another word. I stood there for a long time after the door closed. The house was quiet. I could still smell her perfume lingering in the hallway, something floral and high-end, like it belonged in a conference room, not a home. She didn't know he had the folder. She didn't know she was walking into a boardroom with the ghost of the man who had built everything she was trying to hijack. She thought this was about credit, about titles, about gaining power through charm. She had no idea that the bricks she had stolen were already marked, watermarked, catalogued, and weaponized, and the man carrying them back to the firm was the one person left who couldn't be ignored or fired. At 8:59 a.m. the boardroom on the 41st floor was humming with that smug, caffeinated tension that always clung to morning meetings where someone expected applause. The air was sharp with the scent of citrus oil from the wall diffusers and the artificial cleanliness of overpaid success. Polished shoes were crossed beneath an imported oak table. Stainless steel carafes of artisanal coffee steamed silently on a tray in the corner. The firm's biggest egos, 7 of them plus legal counsel, occupied high-back chairs arranged in a horseshoe around the monolithic conference table, and in the seat reserved for partners, the one directly across from the chairman, sat my wife, radiant, poised, and smiling like the room now belonged to her. She wore a dove-gray blazer over a silk blouse the color of champagne. Minimal jewelry, perfectly calculated to suggest wealth but not desperation for it. In front of her lay the company-branded folder containing the strategy she claimed to have designed. She tapped it once with a manicured fingernail, just to draw attention to it, while laughing at something one of the board members had said. "I've already started mapping out the implementation phase," she was saying. "We'll need tighter control on vendor timelines, obviously. But the rest, honestly, it's plug and play." There were chuckles and nods of agreement. No one dared to ask how she had pulled off such a complex analysis. They didn't care. She was charming, articulate, and photogenic. She had momentum. That's all they wanted. Except for the chairman. He hadn't spoken much, just smiled politely and shuffled a few papers. His watch glinted each time he glanced down at it. 8:58, 8:59. At exactly 9:00 a.m. the heavy glass door at the far end of the room opened, and everything shifted. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just a small disruption, a tear in the room's narrative. An old man walked in. No one recognized him at first. He wore a crisp navy suit that didn't try to be modern. No name tag, no assistant. Just him, holding a thick leather briefcase in his left hand and a plain manila folder in his right. No one stood up. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. He walked past the coat rack, past the coffee service, past the firm's general counsel, who blinked as if trying to place him, and then he stopped beside the chairman. Robert Mercer didn't speak. He simply laid the manila folder on the table in front of the chairman, gave a single nod, and stepped back. The room held its breath. The chairman looked down. He saw the handwriting, familiar, thick, deliberate strokes. Then his face changed. His fingers twitched once, almost imperceptibly, as if resisting the urge to recoil. His lips parted slightly, but he said nothing. The other board members glanced at each other, then at my wife. She gave a small, polite smile, tilting her head with that practiced "who's the sweet old man" expression she wore when dealing with clients who didn't matter. But the chairman's face told a different story. He picked up the folder slowly and opened the flap. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. By the third page, his hand had moved to his mouth. He rubbed his jaw as if trying to erase the expression forming there. He didn't look at her. Not yet. Robert Mercer still hadn't sat down. He remained standing, one hand resting on the back of an empty chair, silent, watching. That's when the murmur started. One board member, Godfrey, the head of operations, leaned sideways and whispered, "Is that who I think it is?" The woman from legal turned pale. She had seen the charter. She knew. Amelia's confidence faltered. Just a hairline crack. She turned to the chairman, still smiling, but now with a question in her eyes. "Is something wrong?" He didn't answer her. He turned to Mercer instead. "Where did this come from?" he asked, his voice dry. Mercer finally spoke. "From the man who wrote it." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. And in that moment, the dynamic of the room changed completely. My wife leaned forward, her brows knitting together. "I'm sorry. I don't understand." The chairman raised a hand, not to her, but to the rest of the room. "We'll be reviewing this first," he said. The warmth drained from the space. Conversations halted. Postures shifted. Whatever narrative she had crafted, the bright, upward arc of her rise, suddenly hung in the air like a cartoon character running off a cliff just before gravity catches up. Even she could feel it. Something was off. No one knew exactly what was inside the folder, but everyone now understood one thing. Whatever this was, it didn't come from her. It came for her. The silence stretched on for so long you could almost hear the tap-tap of the second hand on the clock behind the chairman's head. No one moved, not even Mercer, who stood like a statue at the edge of the room, his hands clasped behind his back as if he were attending a wake, which, in a way, he was. The chairman flipped another page of the folder, his brow lined with a tight ridge of disbelief and something worse, embarrassment, not for himself, but for the board, for what they had allowed to happen. He set that page down, then reached for the next. Snap, flip, silence. Snap, flip. By the time he reached page 6, the tremor in the room was undeniable. My wife shifted in her seat for the first time all morning. The smile was gone now. Her posture was still rigid, but her shoulders had drawn in just slightly. The confidence was draining from her spine. She opened her mouth, likely to pivot, to charm, to fabricate whatever she thought would fill the gap. But the chairman raised his hand. "This strategy," he said, his voice steady but cold, "was stolen." The air shifted again. That word, stolen, had weight. It wasn't corporate, not academic. It was criminal. He looked directly at her now. "Every chart, every model, every predictive data tree you presented as your own, none of it was built by you." She blinked, her mouth opening. "I think there's..." He didn't flinch. "I'm not finished." He turned the folder around, sliding it toward the rest of the board. Version history logs, draft annotations, timestamped server backups with restricted access metadata, original files created 3 years ago, private drafts saved offline, and a security audit showing that the shared version was accessed at 1:14 a.m. unauthorized from a residential IP address not assigned to any company-issued device. The words landed like punches, page after page, exhibit after exhibit. Mercer didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The evidence said everything. Across the table, one of the VPs, Lamar, who had praised her in his quarterly memo, leaned forward and squinted at the folder. Another executive muttered something under his breath about chain of custody. The legal representative scribbled furiously on her notepad. My wife reached for her coffee, knocked it slightly, then corrected herself. Her hand was shaking. This is a misunderstanding, she said, her smile now forced and painful. This is someone's look. I worked on that model too. Maybe I borrowed some language, but the chairman slammed the folder shut. You had no clearance to touch this material. The NDA you signed, page 4, section 6, explicitly prohibits the unauthorized use of protected work product, especially internal strategy documentation marked under the Mercer clause. Her eyes widened. What clause? Robert Mercer stepped forward, his first movement in nearly 20 minutes. He placed one hand on the table. The clause I added when I founded this company, the one that protects builders from thieves. Her mouth opened again, then shut. For once, she had no script. The chairman looked around the table. I'd like to call a vote, he said simply. There was a beat of silence, then nods of agreement. He didn't even ask for discussion. All those in favor of terminating Amelia Renner for breach of contract and ethics violations, effective immediately. Hands went up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Unanimous. My wife didn't move. Her jaw clenched. She turned slowly toward Lamar, who looked away. Then toward the woman from finance, her old brunch buddy, who stared down at the table as if ashamed to have ever been seated next to her. No, my wife said, her voice small now. Wait, you don't understand. I earned that seat. I did the work. I earned this. The chairman didn't look at her. Security will escort you out. Your accounts have already been frozen. Your badge access has been revoked. Your severance is under review. But given the violations, I wouldn't hold your breath. She stood up suddenly, as if she meant to protest. But no one met her eyes. No one offered a hand, not even the junior staffer she had taken under her wing last quarter. Just silence, corporate silence. The kind that buries reputations and rewrites history. Robert Mercer simply turned and walked to the far end of the table. He didn't look at her. He didn't gloat. He just retrieved his folder, closed it carefully, and tucked it back into his briefcase. My wife stood alone in a room where she once thought everyone would fight for her, and every single one of them had just voted her out like she was a bad investment, which, it turns out, she was. The room didn't move, not even a shuffle of papers, just the low hum of the fluorescent lights and the soft buzz of someone's phone on silent. You could feel it. The distance forming around her, invisible but ironclad, the kind of distance people create when they know someone is about to become radioactive. Her voice, usually sharp and confident like a marketing pitch in heels, had gone brittle. She wasn't talking now, just blinking fast. Then the door opened again. 2 figures stepped in, both in black suits. Not the firm's regular security, but corporate security, the outsourced kind. They had neutral expressions, hands held behind their backs, and radios tucked into their cuffs. They didn't say her name, didn't ask for ID. They simply walked to her chair and stood behind her, waiting. She stood up slowly, almost robotically, as if her legs were still catching up to her mind. Wait, she said, her voice trembling but defiant. You can't just. What about a legal review? I want to call. Her laptop locked itself. The screen blinked twice, then went black. Access revoked. Her email was gone. Her cloud permissions were revoked. Even the internal chat system auto-deleted her account in real time. The badge clipped to her blazer let out a low, final beep, the kind you only hear when something has been killed from the back end. She froze. Wait, no. This is wrong. I need to call someone. I need to talk to someone now. Her hands went to her phone, but one of the guards gently placed a hand in front of her. Company device, he said quietly. She hesitated, then dropped it into his palm as if it were a hot coal. That was when the tears came, not the kind that earns sympathy, not cinematic, not tragic. The messy kind, the kind you try to swallow in front of a room full of people who have just erased you with a show of hands. She turned in a slow circle, scanning the faces for any allies. Lamar was looking at his notepad. The finance lady was wiping her glasses. Even the new intern was staring down at his shoes as if they had suddenly become profoundly interesting. And then she turned to the door. She paused for just a second, looking over her shoulder as if maybe someone would stop this, speak up, say it was all a misunderstanding, a mistake, a procedural error. Maybe her husband would appear, steady and calm, and offer her a hand. She looked for me. But I wasn't there. I was 3 blocks away, sitting outside a quiet cafe with ivy crawling up the brick walls. My coffee was still hot. I had a copy of the journal folded neatly in front of me. I wasn't reading the headlines, just watching the morning traffic roll by while the baristas inside argued over the volume of their playlist. From the corner of my eye, I could see the building I used to spend most of my life in. Floor 41 had the widest windows. You couldn't see the people from the outside, but you could imagine them, the way they stared out at the city as if they owned it, as if nothing could ever touch them. Back in the boardroom, the guards gently led her to the door. She tried to speak again, stammering something about her inbox, about an unfinished proposal, about the proof she could provide. No one replied. The chairman nodded once, not to her, but to the security team. And just like that, she was gone. The door clicked shut behind her. And that was it. A woman who had once held the entire growth strategy of the firm in her purse walked out with nothing but a dead badge, a revoked laptop, and a red rim around her eyes. No applause, no parting words. Just the weight of everyone's silence dragging behind her like a chain. She had always thought someone would step in. That's what she had always counted on. Someone else to absorb the impact. Someone to explain, to excuse, to patch over her ambition when it turned into damage. But this time, there was no one left. She had played too many hands, pulled too many threads, and built her seat at the table out of borrowed ideas and stolen tools. And the second it collapsed, everyone around her backed away as if they didn't even recognize the person they had just voted in. Because they didn't. The woman they thought they were partnering with, confident, capable, ethical, had never existed. And now they saw her for what she really was, a counterfeit. At the cafe, I folded the paper, finished my coffee, and left a $20 bill under the saucer. I didn't check my phone. I already knew there would be messages, and I already knew I wouldn't answer them. The fallout didn't explode. It seeped. There were no headlines, no press releases, no public execution, just the silent unraveling of a reputation that had been patched together with someone else's thread. By noon, the whispers had started. Not from the boardroom, those people were trained not to leak, but from the layers just below. The middle managers who overheard too much. The executive assistants who saw the security team escort her out. The intern who watched her badge fail against the elevator panel and then ran straight to Slack. She got walked out. I heard Mercer brought something. Stolen files, like real legal stuff. I always wondered how she moved up so fast. The vacuum her absence left was too loud to ignore. Every team she had touched had to suddenly reshuffle. Her meetings were cancelled. Her calendar was blanked out. The interns assigned to her portfolio were reassigned. The junior associate she had mentored got a call from HR asking if he had ever personally witnessed her use confidential materials outside of protocol. And then came the questions from above. Investors, one of the firm's older limited partners, the type who doesn't say much unless there's blood in the water, sent a formal letter to the chairman requesting clarification regarding the vetting process for recent partner nominations. Translation: How did this happen, and who else is skating by? An internal audit team was activated by 4:00 p.m. conducting a full risk assessment of access logs and credential trails. The phrase pattern of behavior started to float around in the corridors. Suddenly, everyone who had ever taken a shortcut was triple-checking their backups and praying they hadn't emailed themselves a spreadsheet from the wrong account. And her allies? Gone. The Slack messages she sent received no replies. The group text from her executive clique went dead silent. The networking brunch she had organized for the following Thursday was cancelled. Her LinkedIn profile, once a beacon of humble brags and over-filtered headshots, went offline by evening. Whether she deactivated it herself or someone advised her to pull the plug, I'll never know. But her little empire of perception had collapsed, and at home, she pretended like nothing had happened. She came through the front door that evening with a grocery bag and the forced smile of someone who thought if she just played normal hard enough, the truth might dissolve. I picked up that red curry you like, she said, as if I had just come home from a long day, as if we were still pretending. Oh, and sparkling water, the kind with the blood orange. I said nothing. I carried my briefcase upstairs, past the master bedroom, and into the guest room. I shut the door. The lock clicked louder than it should have. She didn't knock. She didn't call my name. She didn't cry. She just sat in the kitchen for a long time. I could hear her moving things around, not cooking, not cleaning, just making noise, as if rearranging the spoons in a drawer might rewrite the day. When I emerged an hour later to grab a charger from the living room, she was sitting on the couch with the TV on mute, staring at nothing, still dressed as if she belonged in a boardroom, even though that place no longer existed for her. She looked up at me, not defiant, not apologetic, just blank. "Are you going to say anything?" she asked. "No," I said, and plugged my phone into the wall. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. I could feel it. The tension between us thicker than any argument we'd ever had. She would have preferred a fight. That was something she could work with. Rage, accusations, something she could spin into a story. We just couldn't see eye to eye. He was jealous. He couldn't handle my success. But this cold, unspoken separation, she didn't know what to do with it. So she tried again. "We were a team," she said quietly. "You helped build that strategy, but I delivered it. I'm the one who got them to believe." I turned to her. "You're right," I said. "You made them believe a lie." She looked away. I walked back into the guest room and closed the door again. No shouting, no slammed cabinets, no lawyers, just the sharp, sterile sound of two people occupying the same house, now divided by the truth. She slept in the master bedroom that night. I didn't ask if she cried. I didn't care. Let her lie there under the 1,000 thread-count sheets, surrounded by the designer pillows she had bought after her first bonus, and wonder how it all slipped through her fingers. Let her scroll through old emails, refreshing for messages that would never come. Let her realize slowly, cruelly, and completely that no one was coming to save her. Not the firm, not the board, not even the man she had married. It was nearly midnight when I heard her footsteps stop outside the guest room. They weren't soft or hesitant, just stalled, as if she had walked down the hallway with purpose, then realized too late that she had no plan once she arrived. The light under the door shifted. She wasn't moving. I didn't say anything. Then, finally, the knock came, barely audible, not a demand, more like a truce flag tapped against the wood. The door opened a crack. Her silhouette filled the space. She didn't cross the threshold. She just stood there, her arms crossed over her robe as if she needed to physically hold herself together. "Why didn't you warn me?" she asked. Her voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. Not fragile, exactly, just hollow, as if she had rehearsed 10 different approaches in her head and landed on the only one that didn't immediately sound like a lie. I didn't look up right away. I finished plugging in my laptop and closed the folder I had been reading an old audit report from the Mercer years, ironically. Then I turned to her. "You knew." Her breath hitched. She looked like she wanted to argue, but the words caught in her throat. She stared at the carpet instead. I didn't think it would go that far, she said. That far, she meant, I didn't think I'd lose, she sniffled, wiping beneath one eye. No makeup now, no performance, just her, in the aftermath of her own fire. I was trying to get ahead, she said. You climbed a ladder someone else built. I presented it, she insisted. I made them listen, and you made sure they never knew who they were listening to. She didn't deny it, just shifted her weight, bracing herself against the door frame as if the truth had a physical weight. I didn't think you'd do anything, she said finally. That landed. I stood and walked a few steps toward her, not enough to close the distance, just enough to make sure she couldn't pretend I wasn't really there. That, I said, was your mistake. She blinked fast, her eyes red now, not the theatrical kind of crying she had used during arguments in the past, not the weaponized vulnerability. These were tears she didn't expect, tears she didn't know what to do with. I thought she began, then stopped herself and looked up at me. Who was that man? The one who walked into the boardroom. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just answered. The man who trusted me before anyone else did. She slumped, not dramatically, no collapsed sobs into her hands, just a quiet, physical collapse of her ego. Her shoulders dropped, her jaw clenched, her eyes wet but unblinking. Her breath went shallow. And then, nothing. For the first time in our marriage, she said absolutely nothing back. No defense, no spin, no shifting of blame, just silence. And in that moment, I realized something far colder than rage. She had never understood me. She understood power, leverage, momentum, the dance of politics. But me, she thought my silence was weakness, my calm was passivity, my patience was complacency. She never understood that silence is where I did my best work. That's why she never saw it coming. She left the doorway eventually. She didn't say goodnight, just turned and padded barefoot back to the bedroom that still smelled of her perfumes and ambition. I sat back down and opened the audit file again. The man who had walked into that boardroom wasn't her enemy. He wasn't even her judge. He was my reminder that some people see you before the world ever does. And if you betray them, there's no coming back. Not with words, not with tears, not even with silence. It was a Wednesday, mid-morning. The sky had that slate gray calm that made everything below it feel still, as if the world itself were holding its breath. I had taken the week off. Technically, I was on unpaid personal leave, but everyone knew it wasn't that. It was victory leave, the kind you don't request, you just take it, and no one argues. The knock on the cafe window surprised me. I looked up from my coffee and saw him, Harold Lang, the chairman. Not the usual place for a meeting, but nothing about the last few weeks had been usual. He motioned as if asking for permission to join me. I nodded once. He stepped inside. He didn't order anything, just pulled out the chair across from me and sat down slowly, as if he had aged 10 years since the last board meeting. Maybe he had. She's officially signed the non-disclosure, he said without preamble. Agreed to a quiet exit. No severance. Smart, I replied. She thought she could negotiate at first, he'd added, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Cried, then blamed a junior staffer, then tried to play the victim. She always had a rotation, I said. He smiled faintly. Yeah, I saw it eventually. Too late. He fell quiet. The cafe noise filled the space between us. Silverware clinks, steam hissing from the espresso machine, a kid somewhere in the back watching cartoons too loud on an iPad. Then Lang leaned forward and said, Robert wouldn't have done that for anyone else. I didn't respond, just let the words land. He tapped the table with one finger. I mean it. He walked out on this company 5 years ago, sold his stake, disappeared, didn't return calls, didn't reply to anything. We thought he was dead or hiding in a monastery. And then this. He walks in like he never left, opens a folder, and ends her career. He trusted you long before she did, I said. Lang exhaled and sat back. I didn't come here to apologize. I know. He looked down at his hands, then back at me. I came to ask if you want the seat. I didn't flinch. I had imagined this conversation, replayed it in my head. Once upon a time, I might have said yes on instinct, chased it, fought for it. But now, no, I said. He tilted his head. You sure? I don't want the title. Just make sure the next person earns it. Lang nodded. No argument, no pitch, just acceptance. We stood up at the same time. He reached for his coat. I dropped a tip on the table. We walked out together, and that's when I saw her. She was stepping into the elevator in the main tower across the street, her arms wrapped around a plain cardboard box. No handbag, no assistant, no key card badge dangling from her belt anymore. Just her, looking very, very small under the brutal fluorescent lights of the lobby. She was wearing the same blazer from the day of the vote. It didn't shine the same way anymore. She looked up and froze when she saw me. That flash of embarrassment, of old muscle memory kicking in, smile, recover, spin, it flickered but never made it to her face. We stared at each other through the glass for maybe 5 seconds. Long enough for her to register what this moment meant. She had spent so long mastering perception, controlling the narrative, dressing the part, projecting power. And now, for once, there was no story to tell, no spin that would rewrite what had happened. Only the truth. And it didn't need to be shouted. As she stepped into the elevator, I took one slow step forward and met her gaze. I said only one thing. You mistook quiet for weakness. Then the door slid shut and she was gone. No headlines, no fireworks, just the final, quiet click of closure. Robert disappeared again. Lang never brought up the seat a second time. The company cleaned house with a subtle restructuring, the usual corporate sweep. And I went back to work the following Monday. Same parking space, same desk, same steady silence. Only now, they all knew. I hadn't needed to raise my voice. I didn't have to. She just needed to listen before it was too late.